Okay.
So this is a course on the senses. We're going to talk today about vision. Next week we will talk about hearing, and then we'll go through the other senses. We have 5 senses, but we have 6 lectures. So the last one will be about senses that other animals have that we do not, and that we get these senses through our technology. So we're going to talk about the eye, which is the organ that we use to see. And here we have a view of the eye if the side of the head was transparent. And what we see are the muscles that move the eye. The eye is the only organ that can move independently of the body. And there are 6 muscles that attach to the eye. And so we can move it right, left, up and down, and rotate it. And it turns out that these are the minimum number of muscles that can be used. They're very delicate muscles, but they're enormously powerful for the job they have to do. And this gives them tremendous reserve capacity so that you could read the Sunday New York Times and keep reading it all day. So even though they're delicate, they're exceedingly powerful. Now, when you look at somebody's eye, you're barely seeing 1/3 of the eye. Most of the eye is hidden inside the head. And what you see is the clear window in the front. You see the white sclera of the eye, and you see the pigmented part of the eye, the iris. This is important. Covering the white of the eye, the sclera, is a transparent tissue called the conjunctiva. And this is important because it has glands that help lubricate the surface of the eye. What you don't see is the most important part, and that is the tear film. And this is more complex than we thought it would be. It consists of 3 layers: a mucus layer on the surface of the eye, a watery layer, which is made by the lacrimal gland, and an oily layer, which is made by these glands in the eyelids. And there are about 30 of them in the upper lid. There's about 20 to 25 of them in the lower lid. They're called meibomian glands. And what they do is produce the mucus. Well, they actually produce most of the oil. And the mucus is produced by the glands in the conjunctiva and the tissue that covers the white of the eye. This is the most important part of the tear film. You can take out the lacrimal gland and get rid of the watery part. But if something damages the glands in the conjunctiva or in the lids, you get a dry eye. And so the tear film does several things. It protects the surface of the eye, it lubricates it, and so it's important that it remain intact. If it breaks up and a dry spot occurs, the eye is going to be uncomfortable. Now, the tears are produced constantly, and so they're drained by a tear duct, the openings of which are in the inside of the lids, upper and lower, and they drain to the back of the throat. And so normally, this mechanism is in sync. But if you have an obnoxious onion that you're cutting, or there's a lot of irritation in the surface, you will get more production of the tears. And then you will overwhelm the capacity of the tear drainage system, and tears will come running down your cheek. So here's the cross-section of the eye. The front part, the cornea, is clear. The lens, which does the focusing, is clear. And most of the eye is filled with a jello-like material. We have the retina, which is like the film in the camera. This actually captures the image. We have the white outer sclera, which forms the fibrous coating of the eye. And then in between, we have a tissue that has the blood vessels, which nourishes the outer part of the retina. Now, you notice there are no blood vessels in the cornea or the lens, because if they were there, they would mess up the rays of light that need to come to a focus in the back. So we're going to see how these tissues get nourished. Now, we have one part of the retina called the macula, which is specialized. It's only about 1.5 millimeters in diameter, but in that 1.5 millimeters are approximately 1 million cones. And so that's where we're seeing our sharpest vision. And then, of course, we have the optic nerve, which transmits the impulse back to the brain. So if we look at the front part of the eye, we have the cornea, which is clear, the lens, which is clear. But these are living tissues. They're producing cells throughout your life, and they're nourished by a clear fluid called the aqueous humor, which is produced by the structure behind the iris, the ciliary body. And so this liquid percolates around the lens, goes through the pupil into the anterior chamber behind the cornea, and it exits through this mechanism in the angle. And this normally keeps up with everything. The eye has to maintain a particular pressure in order to function. And usually this works pretty well. Now, if the drainage isn't up to the production, then the pressure drops and the eye doesn't work. And if the drainage doesn't work well and the pressure builds up, then we have a condition known as glaucoma, and damage will occur to the optic nerve. Now, this structure behind the iris, the ciliary body, has several functions. It has little guy wires called zonules that support the lens in the eye. And there's a muscle in there that focuses the eye. Now we're looking at this in cross section. So imagine this muscle as a circular muscle, or as a donut. And when this muscle contracts, the donut hole gets narrower. It shrinks. And so what it does, it releases the pressure on the zonules, and the lens can now expand. And in doing so, that's how we focus the rays of light coming into the eye. Now, about 70% of the focusing power of the eye is in the cornea. The other 30% is in the lens, and this is the only part that can change its focus. I don't know where the circle is coming from. We don't need it, but it's there. So now we go to the back of the eye. This is the part that actually receives the image and the information. And so, you know, we have rods and cones. The rods see black and white. We have three types of cones that see in color. And the eye is, there are two types of eyes in nature. We have what is called a simple eye, which, as you've seen, is not quite that simple. But it's called a simple eye because it's a single structure. Insects have compound eyes. And the reason is because this is a much smaller eye. It's composed of 3,000 to 8,000 of these segments called ommatidia. And they're about a little over 1,000th of an inch in size. So there are about 3,000 to 8,000 of these in each single eye. Apparently the dragonfly has up to 18,000 of these, but they're very small. I don't know what the fly actually sees, but you can see by having all these multiple segments, it's very good at detecting motion. And so that's why it's so hard to swat that pesky fly. And so there's the difference. We have the two types of eyes in nature. We're going to be concerned about the simple eye, or our type of eye. Now we are surrounded by radiation. And here is the spectrum of the radiation. But the point is how little we actually detect. We don't detect gamma rays or ultraviolet. We feel infrared as heat. And in this very small segment is our visible light range. Now, if we go further down below radar waves and radio waves, way down here is sound. So most of what's out there that we're surrounded by, we don't detect. Now, the cones come in one variety. Well, the cones come in three varieties, actually. Red cones, green cones, and blue cones. Now, when we say a red cone, it means that its peak sensitivity is in the red. In the green, peak sensitivity is green, and the same with the blue. But you notice that a red cone sees a fair amount of the spectrum. Same with the green cone, and same with the blue cone. Now, the rod sees a very large part of the spectrum, but we see it only as black and white. Now, the importance of this overlap is there are certain people that are red-green colorblind because of a genetic thing. And so if you go out and drive, look at the traffic light, and you will find that your red light is really not red, it's red-orange. Your green light is not a true green, it's a green-blue. And the yellow light is not really yellow, it's amber. And these colors are purposely made so that red-green colorblind people can detect them. Well, birds see better than we do because they have a fourth cone, which can see in the ultraviolet. And so birds and many insects see differently than we do. Well, it's possible to make film which can see in the ultraviolet, so we can get an idea of what a bird actually sees. And so we have this false color where, as a human, we might see the eggs like this. The bird might see them differently. But more specifically, if we look at this bird, And we see that it's got a little bit of yellow, but mostly it's pretty bland. But under ultraviolet, other colors may appear. And so the bird may see more colors than we do and see differently than we do. And the same is true of plants. There are certain colors in plants that are visible only under the ultraviolet. And so if we look at this plant, we see as humans would, but the bird would probably see it a little bit differently. And insects that can see in the ultraviolet will see it a little differently. Now this is a complicated slide, and the problem is the eyes are in the front of the head, but the part of the brain that absorbs vision is in the back of the head. And so the passageway has to go through the entire brain to come to the part where we're actually doing the seeing. But we'll take it slow and easy. And what we have here is what the right eye sees in this far right column. Next to it is what the left eye sees. Now, if you see the full circle here, that means we're seeing everything we're supposed to be seeing. We're seeing our full field of vision. But if we start with the right eye here at point A, and we have a problem with the macula, it's like looking at somebody where you see both ears, their chin, and their forehead, but the face you can't detect because it's distorted or it's blurred or part of it's blanked out. And so what we have is a spot in the center here, which is what we call a scotoma. Actually, this is far better than the spot that we actually see. The central spot is really quite small in comparison to the rest of our field of vision. If we have a problem in the nerve that goes from the eye to the brain, then of course that eye is blanked out. We don't get it. And if I were giving this lecture 10 years ago, I would say this is like cutting the wire from the telephone. Now I have to say it's like a tree falling on the cell tower. But the message just doesn't get here. However, now the optic nerve enters the brain and a very interesting thing happens. The two optic nerves join. And now we have radiation that goes to the back of the brain. This is now called the optic tract. But what happens is a very interesting thing. The part of the retina that sees, say in the right eye, that sees the left half of your field of vision stays on the right side. The part of the retina that sees the right half of your field of vision crosses over to the other side. And the same thing happens in the left eye. The left field of vision that sees to the left crosses over to the right side. And the field of vision that sees to the right stays on the same side. So if we have a damage here at D, what happens is we knock out the vision to the left side. So we see to the right, we see in the center that everything from both eyes is out of commission to the left. Now, if we have a problem in the center, what this crossing is, the chiasm, and this frequently happens because the pituitary gland sits right here. And if it swells because of a pituitary tumor, it will damage this area. When this happens, we have what we see here at C. We knock out the side vision of each eye, and this is true of both eyes. This is a problem. If you're driving a car, you're now going to sideswipe a stream of parked cars because you don't see them off to the side. Finally, we get to the middle of the brain at the lateral geniculate body, and here a synapse occurs. So now the message will be transferred to another set of neurons to go to the back. But of course, nothing is simple. So this takes a little loop-to-loop up, and if we knock this area out, we knock out the upper quadrant of the other side. And if we knock out this lower area, we knock out the vision from the lower quadrant from each eye. Finally, we get to the back of the brain, the optic visual cortex. This very large part in the dark color subserves that 1.5 millimeters of the macula. So those million of cones occupy a very large part of the back of our brain. And that's why we can see as well as we do. There's a lot of processing that goes on. Now, the lighter color around it is the part of the visual cortex that takes care of all the rest of the eye. It gets easier from here on in. We see sideways. We have two eyes in front. We can see about 180 degrees in front of us. If you notice animals, like a horse, that has eyes that look out to the side, they can see almost 360 degrees. And so if you look at animals that are prey animals, they have eyes that look sideways so they can see almost everything around them. A lot of predators have eyes like us. We see in the front. This gives us stereoscopic vision, but we only have about 180 degrees. Now, if you're big and bug-eyed, you might see a little bit more than 180 degrees. And if your eyes are deep set inside your head, you'll see a little less than 180 degrees. But we also see in color. We have 3 types of cones. The rods we see in black and white, but they're more sensitive than the cones. And so because of the rods, we have night vision. We also have depth perception. And color blindness, most common type is red-green color blindness. The gene for that is on the X chromosome. So about 8% of men are red-green colorblind, and you inherit it from your mother. Less than 1% of women are colorblind, because for a woman to be colorblind, she has to have a colorblind father and a mother who's a carrier. So she's got a 50% chance of carrying that gene and being colorblind. Now we have some things here we'll call strange vision, of which migraine is one. The people that have migraine, they'll frequently have an aura, which tells them the headache is coming. And many times it's lightning flashes or streaks of light. And this is vision that is not coming from the eye. We think that the electricity is getting short-circuited somewhere in the brain, but it's vision that is not from the eye. After images are a normal phenomenon. If you look at something intensely, say a green dot on the wall, you will exhaust that particular cone that sees the green. And then if you look away at a blank spot on the wall, you'll see the complementary color in red. It's a normal phenomenon, just enjoy it. So how do we measure vision? Well, you're all familiar with this eye chart with the big E. You need to know that eye charts occur in every alphabet in the world. We have here a Russian eye chart. And it was recognized early on that some letters are easier to see than others. So they developed this chart with the rings. And so each object in the chart is equally difficult. It's called a Landolt ring. It's a much better chart than the standard EI chart. And so, of course, it's not used at all. Now, what we mean by 20/20, and this is the English system, it means this is the letter you would be expected to see at 20 feet if you had normal vision. So where did this start? Well, there was a doctor named Herman Snelling around 1860 who developed this chart. And you see here one of the early charts. It says it's for old-sighted people only, and then below it, from age 35 and upward. So that kind of puts it in perspective. We have eye charts for people that don't know their letters, that are illiterate children. And so we have the objects of different sizes, and they describe what they see. Now, here is the famous tumbling EI chart. They're all E's, and you look at the E as fingers on a hand. And so you mention with your hand, here the fingers would be down, here they're off to the side. It's a good eye chart. We use it on people who don't know letters. So what does 20/20 actually mean? This is average good vision. It comes to about 5 minutes of arc. And what it means is that you see at 20 feet what we expect the average person to see at 20 feet. If we were elsewhere in the world where they use the metric system, this would be 6/6. Most children see better than 20/20. Children will frequently see 20/15, sometimes 20/10. The story about Neil Armstrong and the moon is interesting. He was sitting on the moon describing what he was seeing on Earth, and they were beginning to worry about him because he either had super sharp vision or he's hallucinating. So they got him back on Earth and they put him before an eye chart. It turns out he has super sharp vision. He has 20/5, which means that he sees at 20 feet what you with 20/20 vision would see at 5 feet. Super sharp vision. Well, there are certain problems that occur with aging. The cataract loses its clarity. It's a living tissue. It's producing more cells throughout life. And so it becomes a denser structure as we get older. At the age of folks here at Oak Hammock, about 8% of us will have open-angle glaucoma. As we're getting an aging population, more people have macular degeneration. And now it's almost up to 8% of the population. And we'll talk about the two types, the dry and the wet. And then there are changes that occur in the vitreous of the eye, which gives us the flashes and the floater. We'll talk about those. The cataract is due to a loss of clarity of the lens. As it becomes more cellular, the character of the cells becomes less clear, and so light coming into the lens reflects internally in the lens and gives us a glare problem. Also, because of the density of the lens is not as clear as it used to be. We have a problem night driving. It's like having a pair of sunglasses you can't take off. When it gets to the point where the glare is too much and we're not seeing as well, under eye cataract surgery, we remove the cloudy tissue in the lens. Now, normally when we do this, the lens now becomes very farsighted. And so before we had the intraocular lenses, you had to wear a very thick pair of glasses to get back in focus. Now at the time of surgery, you insert an itty-bitty intraocular lens to give you back the focusing power of the light, of the eye. Glaucoma, 8% of people our age. Open angle is a physiologic increase of pressure. The aqueous is being produced constantly, but there's a problem in the regulation. It's not being absorbed as well as it used to be. And so now the pressure in the eye rises. Now, most of the eye can tolerate this except for the optic nerve. That is the part that is sensitive to the rise in pressure. And if it isn't controlled, the several million fibers in this nerve will slowly die one by one. And unfortunately, they don't come back. So if you don't treat this, you will eventually go blind. It takes years, but it will happen. Closed angle glaucoma is a different story. Here, there's a problem in the anatomy of the eye, where things get crowded in the front, and the iris comes forward and closes off the drainage angle. And so the fluid, the aqueous humor, cannot drain at all. The pressure rises to very high levels, and this is excruciatingly painful. The treatment is to make an opening in the iris to provide an alternative pathway for the aqueous to flow. And we do this now with a laser beam. So the treatment of these two is different. Now, sometimes the cataract gets thick to the point where it just crowds out everything. When that occurs, then we have to remove it then and there. Macular degeneration, we're seeing more and more simply because people are aging. We're seeing more elderly people. And this occurs because there's a change in the retina and the choroid in the back of the eye. There's a change in the tissue. Usually it's a crack in the tissue. And the problem is the eye tries to repair this damage. In the wet type, a new blood vessel grows in to attempt to repair it. And the new blood vessel is abnormal. It oozes blood, leaks, and so it causes damage. The dry type is simply the tissue becoming atrophic. You might say it's pooping out. And we'll show you more of this. The treatment for these is completely different. For the wet type, we use what is called an anti-VEGF. Now, when the tissue gets damaged, it secretes a hormone, which causes this blood vessel to grow. And so the drugs that we use are aimed against this growth of a new blood vessel. And they work. The trouble is they don't cure. So it's an intraocular injection that has to be repeated every month or several months. The dry type, we unfortunately have no good treatment for. There are true drugs being researched, Syfovre and Izervay, and we think that the dry type is due to an immune response in the effect of the eye. It's a very slow progression that these drugs have. They don't really stop the development, but they slow it down. The drugs that we have do not improve or restore vision, and unfortunately, they seem to be able to lead to a wet type of macular degeneration. So we don't really have a good treatment for the dry type yet. Well, if you look into the eye, this is what we see. Now keep in mind, everything here is very highly magnified. This round orange is the disc. This is 3 millimeters in diameter. The area here where there are no blood vessels is 1.5 millimeters in diameter. The blood vessels you see are really very tiny in relationship to the other blood vessels in the body. And you notice that in the very center, the macula, there are no blood vessels. Now, those of you who are in front may see this yellow spot right in the front. So the early people who looked at the eye called this the macula lutea because it's Latin for yellow spot. Not very imaginative. But now look what happens with macular degeneration. These two pictures are completely different from the previous one. So if we look at the dry type, the most striking feature are these yellow spots, which are called drusen, and they're a deposit of material in the retina. And as the disease progresses, these become larger, they become confluent, pigment occurs around them, and as a result of them being there, they slowly kill off the cones that are in the macula. Now, this is a quite striking picture, but this is consistent with 20/20 vision. So this process continues. The good news is it's a slow process and it takes a long time. The bad news is we don't have a treatment for it. Now, contrast that to the wet macular degeneration. Here you see blood and you see fluid, and it's a completely different picture. Now, the eye produces this, and if no further bleeding occurs, this blood will be absorbed. The problem is if the bleeding continues, the blood is absorbed, but a scar forms. And this scar, of course, does not see, and it destroys the tissue in the back of the eye that does see. So wet macular degeneration is a real problem. It's a more severe condition. The problem is your vision goes precipitously from 20/20 to say worse than 2200 when the actual bleeding occurs. So most of us will keep good vision. Keep in mind the retina and the optic nerve is as old as we are. This tissue was there the day you were born, and it has to last your entire life. It is so highly specialized that it has lost the ability to repair itself. So if damage occurs, it's permanent. Now, the eye is very well protected. You have the heavy bone of the forehead, the heavy bone of the cheek to protect it. Even if you're the skinniest person in the world, there is a pad of fat behind the eye, which acts as a shock absorber. So the eye is really like a camera with a computer attached to it. But there's more to seeing than just the picture and the image. We see color, we see depth, we detect motion, we have stereo vision, we can see in low light, and then we have this interesting thing called phosphenes. If you rub your eye, you'll see flashes of light, you'll see stars. What you've done is stimulate the rods and cones to fire. And so that produces the light flash that we see. It's a normal phenomenon. We should talk about floaters and flashes because this is an aging phenomenon in the vitreous. When the vitreous is formed when you're young, it's like new jello. It's solid and it stays put. But as we get older, this structure collapses. And so you have a more congealed part and a more watery part. Now, the congealed part is still clear, but it's a little denser and it casts a shadow in the back of the eye. And this is the floater that you see in front of you. Now, you only see the floater that's in your line of sight. So your floater will be there, and after a month or so, the vitreous shrinks a little bit more. And now, as far as you're concerned, your floater has gone away. Well, it's really just out of your line of sight. All you have to do is flick your head or flick your eye. This will throw the floater into motion, and now your floater comes back again. The flashes occur, first of all, when the floater occurs. When the floater forms, the vitreous is constricting, it's peeling away from the surface of the eye, and that gives us that phosphene. The rods and cones fire. Now, if you just see an occasional flash, that's innocuous. But if the flashes persist and you keep seeing them, then you need to be examined because this may indicate a tear in the retina. And this is something that can be treated early on with a laser beam. But if you ignore it and it goes to a retinal detachment, then you're in for a couple of hours of surgery. We talked about after images. What is Brownian movement? Well, if you've had the experience of lounging out in the sunlight, just looking at a blank sky and letting your eye go out of focus, and you see these little critters moving about, look like little paramecia or what have you. What you're seeing is debris in the tear film, and now you can see it. It's a perfectly normal phenomenon, and just enjoy it. Well, stereo vision. Here we have a problem. We have a ship of pirates. Everybody has an eye patch. And as you see, they have a problem. Nobody has depth perception. Well, it probably wouldn't occur this way because we have many monocular cues as to where things are in the world. If you want to try an interesting experiment, look out the window at the scenery outside, and then cover one eye with your hand. And you will notice immediately that everything looks flat, but you still know where everything is in the world. What's in the foreground blocks out stuff in the background. And the brain knows the approximate size of what you're seeing. So we really don't have a problem if you don't have stereo vision. It's nice to have it, but if you don't have it, you get around fine in the world. You can drive without any problems, and it's not really a problem. If you have a dominant eye or the eyes don't work together, then you don't have true stereo vision. We all have presbyopia or old sight. It's normal aging. The lens gets stiffer, it gets cloudy, and the muscle that focuses the eye, the ciliary muscle, gets weaker, becomes less muscular and more fibrous. So we get reading glasses to compensate for that. We turn the light brighter to compensate for the density of the cataract. And when we do that, the pupil gets smaller, and this gets us increased depth of field, so we can see better. Now, I have to mention the pilocarpine drops because this is an old idea that shouldn't happen. Pilocarpine is an old drug we used to use for glaucoma. It worked, but we have much more effective drugs now. And pilocarpine is kind of a nasty drug. When you drop it on the eye, it irritates. The eye turns red. The focusing muscle in the eye goes into spasms, so you get a headache. So it's not a very nice drug to use. But somebody figured that if you use pilocarpine to make the pupil small, you don't need reading glasses. To add insult to injury, pilocarpine is a very cheap drug, but now they charge you $100 for a bottle of this stuff. Pretty much all of us are wearing glasses. So what do you actually know about glasses? Well, if you're one of these people that doesn't need glasses for distance, you need about a plus 2.50 for reading. Now, this is all in the metric system. This puts you in focus at about 13 to 14 inches. If you want more power, you get a stronger glass, +3, +3.5, but you'll have to hold things closer. For the computer, you're at about 22 inches, and a plus 1.50 will do fine. Now, myopia is simply a fancy term for being nearsighted. In this instance, the power of the eye to focus is a little too strong, or the eye is a little bit longer than the focusing power requires. And so the image that we have comes to a focus in front of the retina, and then it's blurred. Well, not much we can do about that except to put a glass in front of the eye that diverges rays of light. And so now the image will come to a focus where it's supposed to be on the retina. Hyperopia, the eye is farsighted. The focusing power isn't quite up to snuff, but if you're young, you can use your lens to compensate for that. And if you're very farsighted, you're using the ciliary muscle to get what you're seeing in focus, and the price you pay is a headache, because this muscle will get tired. Astigmatism, it occurs because the surface of the eye is not a sphere. It's warped, if you will. Now, those of you who've seen a picture by El Greco, the figures are elongated, and it was felt that El Greco had uncorrected astigmatism. And if you take the appropriate lens out of my trial case of lenses and hold it in front of your eyes, El Greco's figures will look right. So we think that he had uncorrected astigmatism. Astigmatism basically distorts. And so if you're used to the experience of focusing the sun's rays of light onto a piece of paper or a leaf, and so that point light source comes to a focus and it burns a hole in the paper. Imagine that point of light now coming to focus as a line, because that lens is focusing only in one meridian. And so basically astigmatism is a distortion. The bifocal was invented by Ben Franklin. He had two pairs of glasses, distance and reading. He cut all four lenses in half, put the distance part in the top, put the reading part in the bottom, and close the frame together. So he invented the bifocal. We still use that today if we have a prescription where the lens cannot be made as a single unit, and we'll still use a Franklin bifocal. Trifocals, exactly what it says. You have three segments. You have a top distance, you have a middle, which is an intermediate, which will let you see your computer, and you have a reading segment in the bottom. Now, a progressive lens is not really a bifocal. It's a progressive. It's a different type of lens, and we'll show you that in just a minute. Most lenses today are aspheric. That means they're not spherical. We do this to increase the quality of the lens. So unless you have a very, very strong prescription, as you move your eye across the lens in your glasses, the image that you see looks pretty good. It's not distorted. Straight lines remain straight. And it's taken some sophisticated optics to get it that way. Now, glasses were originally made out of glass, but glass is heavy, and it has a problem. And when it breaks, the edge is very sharp, and you don't want a sharp edge a half inch in front of the eye. So virtually all glasses today are plastic. Polycarbonate is simply Lexan. The advantage of plastic is it's lightweight, and we can mold it. So we can make exotic curves to give you a better quality of vision. Now, here's what a progressive lens does. It was patented in 1953 by a French engineer, Bernard Maitez, but it wasn't until 1959 that he actually figured out how to make it. And what you're doing is having a lens that gradually changes in curvature as you go from top to bottom. And here we have a Geneva lens clock, which measures the curve of the lens. And you see as we go down this lens, the curvature power is different. The dotted red line is what would be if the curve didn't change. But this is a difficult thing to do. And the way it works, you have a segment at the top, which is for distance. You have a central corridor, which is your progression. Now, this means you have this narrow edge where your prescription is accurate, but you're changing the power gradually toward reading. So you come to the very bottom where you have your reading segment in your prescription. The price you pay in the trade-off is when you get to the rest of the lens, the power of your prescription no longer is there. This lens is not accurate. As long as you're willing to follow the rules, stay in the part of the lens that works, you'll be fine. And most people develop a tolerance to the progressive lens, and they like it. There's some people like me where I get off the center and it drives me crazy. So I'm in a flat top bifocal. So what do you know about glasses? Keep in mind that glasses are a very high-tech product. They very rarely break, and the glass frame itself is made of exotic materials. You notice when the glass frame is being fitted, whoever's doing it will heat the frame, bend it to the curve that's appropriate to fit you, and then as the frame cools down, it retains that change in the curve. You have coatings you can scratch on it, where I have an anti-scratch coating, which is basically a coating of quartz on top of the plastic. It gives you the toughness of glass and the lightweight of plastic. You can get an anti-reflective coating, but they're fragile. If you are going to take care of your glasses the way you do take care of your camera lens, then it's fine. But a good vigorous cleaning of your glasses with your handkerchief will take off most of this coating. Now we go to sunglasses. Originally, the pigment was in the glass, but the thickness of the glass changed as you went from the center to the side. So the density of the pigment in the sunglass changed. Well, now the sunglasses are made with a coating on the back surface. So the pigment is uniform, and the sunglass is uniform, edge to edge. Photochromic glasses, these are the transition lenses. Originally, this was in glass, and it was like the film in your camera. It was a silver deposited in the substance of the glass, and when ultraviolet light hit it, it changed color. It became darker. And then when the ultraviolet light went away, it changed back. Problem is we went to plastic lenses and this didn't work. Now we do have transition lenses in plastic, but it's an organic dye that's used to do the change. Now keep in mind that a lot of things filter out ultraviolet. The windshield of your car, the window in your house, any glasses that you have. But they don't filter out all of the UV. So if you're in a situation where there's a lot of UV, like a ski slope, or watching a welder's arc, you need to have extra protection because that extra ultraviolet will come through your glasses. And what it will do is be absorbed by the surface tissue in the eye, in the cornea. And it destroys some of these cells. Now the problem is delayed. It doesn't occur. The damage occurs when you're watching. But what happens about 4 to 6 hours later is now the eye is telling you that something's going wrong. This damaged tissue irritates the nerves in the cornea, which then causes the ciliary muscle to go into spasm. So what you get is a terrific headache. And the only way to give you relief is to put atropine on the eye to paralyze this muscle. And then we patch the eye. And the reason we patch an eye is to help it heal, because the action of the upper lid opening and closing will irritate a damaged tissue. And so when we patch the eye, it's like putting a bandage on the eye that promotes healing. Fitting of glasses, you pick out the frame you like. The optician adjusts the frame on your face. And then he's taking a millimeter rule to do a bunch of measurements. So what's he really doing? He's making sure that the lenses in your glasses are where they ought to be. Now, if the optical centers of the lenses are not on the same horizontal plane, one's higher than the other, you put those glasses on and you will see double. If the optical centers are not where your eyes are, they're either too far out or too far in, when you put those glasses on, you will think like two gremlins are pulling your eyes apart or coming too close. And if it's a little bit off the other way, you put those glasses on and you get instant vertigo and nausea, and you're about to give back your lunch. So let the optician do his measurements, get the lenses correctly set, and you'll both be happier. The last thing we're going to talk about is polarized light. Light, as it comes from the sky, vibrates in all directions. And there are things that will block out part of this light. The polarized glasses that you get allow vertically polarized light to pass and block the light that is horizontally polarized. Now that's because most of the glare that we see comes in the horizontal direction. So if you have a glass that eliminates that horizontally polarized light, you eliminate the glare. So there's an advantage to having a polarized glass and a polarized sunglass. Now, a polarized glass per se does not have a color, it's clear. But frequently you'll have it combined with the sunglass. And the advantage is it eliminates the reflection, it reduces the eye strain, you're more comfortable with it, and you also get an increased enhancement of the contrast. So it's a good combination to have, and fortunately it's becoming more popular. Well, most of us will enjoy good vision. All these things I've talked about will affect a minority of us. The eye is well protected. It functions usually without any maintenance. And as you see here, we have the Great Wall of China. This is a bright sunny day in China. Those of you who have been there know that pollution is terrible. But fortunately, we will see well, and we will see without any difficulty. So we've covered a great deal, and I'm sure there are questions you have, and we'll be glad to answer. Oops, that's okay. All right, we want to give the microphone out.
Questions? Any questions for him?
Thank you, Joe. That was very interesting. One time I told you that I had some zebra lines in my line of vision, and you told me that that was some sort of a thing that some people have, some people don't. It's not always there. And it was kind of a migraine. Was that a migraine or something else?
Well, it can be a migraine. Years ago, Sandoz, the pharmaceutical company that makes a migraine medicine, found an artist who had migraine, and they contracted with him to make pictures of his migraine aura and put it in a calendar. I wish I would have kept it because it's the most striking series of zigzag lines, lightning streaks that you could ever imagine. But a lot of the things that we see, sometimes there'll be gunk on the surface of the eye, and that will mess up our vision. And we'll see streaks and things like that. Permanently seeing vertical lines, I don't have an answer for.
Hold on one second.
Hi there. I'm finding lately that the longer that I'm spending reading texts on my cell phone or news and stuff on the computer screen, that my eyes they feel almost like a clear gel is forming in my eyes, and it's getting blurry vision. I'm sure the answer is don't stay on there so long.
No,
but is in
no,
there
there's an
anything-
answer to your problem. And what happens is when we read or look at our cell phones, we tend to blink less, and the eye tends to get dry. So if you take a couple of blinks, that may cure your problem. Now, a lot of people, like grad students who have to read a lot of text, you can read for about 20 to 30 minutes because these eye muscles have tremendous reserve power. But even the ciliary muscle, if it's focusing, has to have a rest occasionally. And you don't have to rest very long. Just look at a far distance without moving your eye for maybe 20, 30 seconds, and then you can get another 20, 30-minute cycle out of it. But the problem that you're describing is due to the surface of the eye becoming a little dry. And if you make a blink consciously or a couple of blinks, you'll find that that'll resolve the problem usually.
Oh, change your mind. Anybody else have a question? Okay.
Joe, when you learn that you're going to have a cataracts operation, but you're not sure when, do you get any clues from your body as to when is the right time?
Well, that depends on you. It depends how thick your cataract is, how much it's impairing your vision, how much the glare from the cataract is bothering you. And some people are happy with 20/60, 20/70 vision, and they don't mind the glare. And some people at 20/50, the glare is a problem. So it depends when you reach the point where you say, my vision isn't what it would like it to be. I would like it to get better. And that's the point when you make the decision to have the cataract removed. It's variable in everybody.
It's on.
Yes, what can you tell me about Salzman's nodular degeneration?
Well, this is a genetic condition, and it's passed on in the families. And it's a dystrophy of the cornea. And it usually isn't much of a problem. The eyes become a little bit on the dry side, but it rarely progresses to the point where you need to have a corneal graft. So Salzman's nodular dystrophy, and some people will say it's not even a true dystrophy. They think it occurs because of the tear film not being quite adequate.
Is there a treatment for it?
Artificial tears.
Artificial. Thank you.
Thanks for your talk. Very interesting. Especially, I didn't know that birds can see ultraviolet lights, can see much more, and that El Greco was
I'm sorry, I'm having
astigmatic.
trouble hearing you. Just talk into the microphone.
Oh, okay, sorry. My question is, what causes the blood vessels to cause red eye?
Well, the blood vessels are normally there, but they're small. Anything that irritates the eye will make these vessels dilate to provide more nutrition to the irritated tissue. So if you put a drop in your eye that irritates it, these blood vessels will stand out. Normally, you can see blood vessels in the eye if you look hard. So they are normally there. Okay. Any other questions? well,
Fine thing again. Fine. Look at the question. There's no questions on Zoom.
okay.
I was just checking Zoom in case there was a question on Zooms. Sorry. Okay, I'm running back here.
Thank you, Joe. That was a great lecture. Can you tell me how frequently does one require YAG surgery?
I'm
After
sorry, I'm
surgery.
having trouble here.
Can you
Listen,
tell me how often people require YAG surgery after cataract surgery?
Okay, well, the way we do the cataract now is different than the way we used to do it. And when I was trained early on, we took out the entire lens, including the entire capsule. But now we do what we call an extracapsular, where we leave the posterior membrane of the capsule intact in the eye, and we put the intraocular lens on top of that. Unfortunately, you can't get rid of all the cells that are in that lens. And so as time goes by, a layer of cells will grow across that membrane, which normally is clear. And so what we do is use a YAG laser to basically punch a hole. Before we had the YAG laser, it required inserting a thin needle knife in the eye to slice an opening in that capsule. Now YAG laser is amazing because it acts like a scissor that you can't see. But you pulse the laser and all of a sudden an opening appears in the capsule. So what we basically do with the YAG laser is we give you an opening in the center, which is not hazy. So now the image that you get is clear. It occurs probably in about, 30, 40, 50% of people who have cataract surgery. But it's a procedure that's done in the office or wherever the YAG laser is. Takes 5 minutes actual working time, a fraction of a 100th of a second of actual laser time to do this.
Since we're speaking about cataract surgery, there's laser and there's where they actually cut. So do you prefer or do you think one is better than the other, or this gag or YAG or whatever you were just talking about? If you have laser surgery to begin with the cataract, can that still happen?
Well, what's happening is this. Keep in mind the laser is just another tool that we use. Now, in order to do the cataract surgery, you have to remove the front capsule of the lens. And we can do this either with a knife or a hook, or we can do it with a laser. It doesn't matter how you do it, as long as you remove that front capsule. So the laser is just another tool that we use. There's nothing magic about it. We have lasers that coagulate. We have lasers that cut. We have lasers that can do a lot of things that we'd otherwise have to use a scissor or a knife to do. So it depends really on the surgeon's preference as to how he wants to do it. Now that's a different thing. This is after the cataract is done, the eye is healed, and usually, might be a year later, 6 months later, that the membrane behind the implant now becomes hazy. And so we use a YAG laser, which is a laser that fires in a few millionths of a second. So it's basically a punch. And what it acts in reality is like a scissor. It actually cuts a hole in that membrane. So we're giving you a clear space in the middle of a cloudy tissue. And that's how it works. If we didn't have the laser, we would have to use a knife to do that. No, we're using it in different places. The initial laser surgery is cutting away the front capsule of the lens, which you're now going to remove, and then remove the cloudy tissue that forms the cataract. What we're talking about with the laser after the surgery